what I want to discuss is the concept of Sinat Chinam, which is usually translated as baseless or causeless hatred. I am not a big fan of that definition, and that's what the shir is going to be about tonight. I think a better translation is what I would call purposeless hatred. Okay, and I'm going to explain it. I have to explain what I mean. But it starts with the Gemara in Yuma. The Gemara in Yuma, Testament Base, says, in the Mikdash Rishon, the first base of Mikdash, it says, Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, and Shfichas Damim. The three big sins were the reason for the destruction of the first temple. Idolatry, wanton, major, inappropriate sexuality, and murder were the three cardinal sins of Judaism, and they were the reason for Korban Bayis Rishon. It says, but the Gemara goes and says, Avol Mikdash Sheni, but the second base of Mikdash, Shahayu Oskim b'Torah u'b'mitzvot u'gemilas chasadim. They're involved in Torah and mitzvot and gemilas chasadim. Means they're basically frum. They're involved in learning. They're involved in doing mitzvot, and they're involved in helping out people. B'nei mai charvu. Why was it destroyed? B'nei shahayta bo Sinat Chinam, because they had Sinat Chinam, and this Sinat Chinam was considered to be worse than the causes of the first temple, because the first temple, the Exodus was 70 years. The Galus, I should say, the diaspora was 70 years. Or Galus Babel was 70 years. We're still Rahman al-San in Galus Aroma in the second Galus. Even though we now are back into Eretz Yisrael and so on and so forth, we still don't have the Beis Hamikdash, and without the Beis Hamikdash there is a lack in our sovereignty on the land, a lack of our Jewish presence on the land, and therefore we are still considered to be in Galus. And that's the reason we still mark Tisha B'Av, because we're still in Galus. And the point is that this Galus has lasted almost 2,000 years, so Sinat Chinam is considered to be worse than the three cardinal sins of Judaism. So what exactly is Sinat Chinam? So people want to translate it as baseless hatred or causeless hatred. There are a few reasons I don't like them, but right off the bat, what did I say were the reasons for the Korban Bayis Rishon? There was Shfichat Damim was one of them, right? Now, Shfichat Damim is murder. Now, what usually is behind murder? Anger. Which implies a certain lack of camaraderie. So the point is that if you're saying that there's a Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, Shfichas Damim, if you're saying that there was this murder and there was obviously violence, then obviously behind violence is usually some type of hatred, some type of negative feelings among the people. So, right off the bat, the Sinat Chinam, you can't just sit there and say it's hatred. Well, obviously there must have been hatred in the first temple because there's Shfichas Damim. So there has to be a specific definition of hatred. Not only that, there's a second question already in what I just presented. It says that they're oskim b'Torah u'b'mitzvot u'gemilat chasadim. Gemilat chasadim is an aspect of the English translation usually is loving kindness. Well, they're involved in loving kindness. What does it mean that they had hatred? So this type of hatred is something that's a little bit needing of definition. Okay, and baseless and causeless hatred I find to be problematic. Okay, and my final point is, what's the famous story that's told for the reason for the Korban Bayis Sheni? What's the famous story? Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, yeah. Right? What happens?
He got tossed from a party.
He got party. You know how he got tossed from the party? In the most embarrassing way.
Bystanders.
Yeah, but in the most embarrassing way. He says, please, let me stay. I'll pay for half the party. And he's told, no. There's the door. Yeah. Now, let me ask you something. If you were thrown out of a party in such a way, right, what would be your feelings towards the person who said, get out? Would he be your best friend?
No, you'd be hurt and therefore angry and resentful.
So what happens is whoever it is comes to Baruch is that he goes, and the reason that he's considered to have destroyed the temple is because what he does, the Gemara says, is he goes he decides on a plan to get back at the Jewish people. He said basically the sages were there and the Rabbanim were there and no one stood up for him. I'm going to get them back. So he went to Rome and told the Roman emperor that the Jews are planning to revolt. Right? And the Romans said, what proof is this? He says, you'll see they won't accept your korban. Now the truth is the Roman Caesar used to sacrifice a korban every day in the Beis Mikdash. Okay? If you knew about the Romans, they wanted to cover their all bases with all the gods. And the Jewish God was considered to be a pretty heavy God. Okay? The fact is already there was a very strong trend in the world towards monotheism. There was a lot of talk about one God and so forth and so forth. If you read Josephus, there were a tremendous amount of people who were considered to be friends of the Jews. And a tremendous amount of people would have loved to convert to Judaism. A lot of women really were ready to convert right away. They just didn't want to convert without their husbands. And their husbands basically said, no. And the reason for that was because for women to convert, all it just means is taking a bath. For a man to convert, there's a certain procedure they have to go through without anesthesia, which they said, listen, I love you, but no thank you. So the truth is Josephus talks about them, but there were a lot of people who were friends of the Jews. The idea of one God was big and so on and so forth. So the Caesar used to send a sacrifice every day to the Beis Mikdash. So he went to Rome. He says they're planning to convert. And Caesar says, what are you talking about? He says, listen, you send a sacrifice with me, and I'm telling you, they'll reject it because they don't want to let you get in good favors with their God. Okay, and what happened was Kamsa went with this korban from the Caesar, and he made a mum on it, a blemish on it, a blemish that meant nothing to idolaters. In other words, the idolaters also didn't want to have blemished stuff going before their idols. This blemish would be totally irrelevant to idolaters, but it was a mum vis-a-vis korbanos. So he did this, and he came before the God of it. This is a mum. We can't accept this korban, right? And it was from the Caesar. And the truth is, I forget the cases, but it's a fascinating statement over there, because they asked someone who was a sage and said, what should we do? So there were arguments saying, listen, you guys, we better accept it because it could be bad news if we reject the sacrifice of the Caesar. And there was one person, I forget who it was, who said that it was he says, no, listen, this was not a good korban, and basically he said, listen, I'm not big enough to make a decision to say that it's mutter to be makriv this korban, but the straight halacha is that it got to be makriv, and I'm not willing to say because of I don't think I can say that there's extenuating circumstances we can actually be makriv a korban with a moon. So they weren't makriv it, and therefore the korban was rejected, gone back to Caesar. So the truth is, what Kamsa did, whatever is that, not sure whoever it was. I never know from the Guru who was Kamsa or Ban Kamsa was, but he basically, because of his anger towards Jewish people, he basically got the Caesar against him, and that's where the whole revolt started, and so forth and so forth. Now the point is you look at it, he obviously went overboard. There was no reason for him to get so try and take down everyone doing it, but to say that his hatred was not baseless, he had a reason for being angry. He was embarrassed. So I never liked the idea of it being that it's baseless. He overreacted, but that's different than saying there was no basis. Now, just to the aside, you should know that in the case over there, it says over there, Gemara says, because of the anivus of this sage who said, "Don't be makriv," the bias was destroyed. And Ramosha Feinstein points out, it's interesting the language of anivus. It says, if you're in a position of being a posek, right, you have to have confidence in yourself. And he says, listen, there's anivus we think that humility is great and so forth. That you have to know that there's certain times you have to make a decision, and you have to know that on one hand you have to know, listen, this is beyond me. I'm not able to paskin. But makam sheinish, you start liyod. There's no one else. You got to paskin. But you have to know when the buck stops here. You have to know that he says because of this person and his anivas. You think it's a good attribute. He says, who am I to make decisions over? At that point in time, you had no right to be an anif. So it's an interesting point that he says that the anivas, humility, Gemara says humility was one of the reasons for the churban. So that's something to keep in mind. And we talked before about dialectic, and the fact is there's always a place for every emotion.
But that's a really strong life lesson.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely.
Like across the board.
Across the board. The fact is that in so many ways we teach lessons one way without recognizing that lessons always have to be taught in the dialectic. You have to be humble, and that's why they even say by Moshe Rabbeinu, the word humble is not really a nivus. Humility reflects a Christian concept. A nivus is much more knowing who you are. And knowing who you are means to know your good points and to know your strengths and to know your weaknesses. Right? And when it's appropriate for you to apply your strengths, you apply your strengths. Anyways, that's the other side. But the truth is from the story of Ban Kamsa, I never liked the idea that it was baseless hatred. Okay, there was a reason. It was inappropriate what he did with it and so forth. So the fact is, though, is it's very interesting. Rabbeinu Bachya, in his Kata Kamach, and also I saw this in something called Avius Yisrael, Kuntras Avius Yisrael, which is from the Chavetz Chaim. They refer to the following verse in terms of the concept of Sinat Chinam. The verse they refer to is Lo tisnes achicha bilvavecha hocheach tochiach v'zamisecha. Don't hate your brother in your heart. Rebuke him. Rebuke your compatriot. Okay. The fact is, in referring to that pasuk, they're referring to the actual concept of what is the prohibition of hatred. Okay? They would say, listen, what was it? What were people over by Sinat Chinam? They were over this verse. This is the verse they were violating. Now, what exactly is this verse? So the Rambam holds, and he says this in Hilchos Deis, okay, and it's in the 6th parak of Hilchos Deis, and it's halacha Hey and Vav 5 and 6. Basically says it's not don't hate. First, not to don't hate. Okay, first of all, people hate. There's a whole argument about emotions. What does it mean whenever the Torah tells you to have an emotion?
How can you not be jealous?
Right. How can you kabeda tzadicha esimecha? Honor your parents. V'ahavta Hashem alecha, love God. Can you? For first question, can you control your emotions? V'samachta b'chagecha. Be happy in your holidays. Can you control your emotions? That's a big question in halacha. Okay, the fact is can you really control your emotions? The question is that if you can't control your emotions, what exactly is the halachic argument? So some people say that the halachic argument is to take steps to try and lead to this emotion. Take steps to try and make it enjoyable. Okay. However, it's in the steps. The mitzvah is to take these steps. There's other people who say that similarly that there are certain behavior that goes with this type of emotion. So it's very interesting in terms of let's say kavedes avicha v'etimecha. Okay, so the point is that it's talking about the other it's talking over there about this case is that if you're sitting at the head of a shear and your mother walks in and screams at you and yells at you and spits in your face, so while you're giving a public statement, the halacha says in Shulchan Aruch, don't get angry, don't respond, don't get angry and so forth, because you're supposed to have reverence for your mother. Why? Because that's the Sivui Hashem. Person comes in and do that. Are you really going to feel reverence for this person? Are you really going to feel honor for this person? So I point out that a lot of times, it's usually found in terms of action. What you feel is an objective. We want you to feel these feelings, but the truth is that I don't know if you are going to feel. If you're going to feel this, I don't know if you're in control of getting those feelings. Okay, there might be reasons why you can't develop those feelings, but this is the behavior that Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's interesting. In the Shulchan Aruch, it says what's supposed to go through your mind. Not, I'm supposed to have reverence for my mother, but this is the Tzivui Hashem. Okay, which means, and that's what the actual language in Shulchan Aruch is, because this is the Tzivui Hashem, means, listen, I am supposed to have, God demands this behavior. So there is a whole view in terms of any type of any type of emotional behavior. It's saying, listen, I can't tell you not to have an emotion. Emotions exist. I can tell you to work on your emotion, take steps towards the emotion, and so forth. It's almost like the mitzvah puravu, right? The fact is that there's an interest between the kiyum mitzvah and the ma'aseh mitzvah. The kiyum mitzvah is to have a kid. The ma'aseh mitzvah is to have relations leading to the kid. But the point is that you can't say whether you'll have a kid or not. So you really have no control over the fact of whether you'll have a kid. All you can do is do what you can do to have a kid. And that's why, in terms of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects of you, is to do what you can do towards that ideal. So there's certain mitzvahs like that. That the mitzvah is basically saying, attempt this. So you could say, I'm supposed to attempt to have this emotion, but obviously I can't control emotion. Or the mitzvah is to behave in a way that's as if I had that emotion, even though I may not necessarily have that emotion. So over here, the Rambam is very specific. The mitzvah is not to hate. But the Rambam even goes further over here. It says the mitzvah here is not don't hate. And he actually says over here, in the statement, he says, if you go over because of your hatred, you go over to your friend and are violent towards him, you have not violated lo sisna es achicha b'levecha. Which is interesting because you go back to the Churban Bayis Rishon of Shvichas Damim. If lo tisna is the basis of Sinat Chinam, then the fact that they killed each other is not a violation of tisna. Okay? It's another violation. You kill people, but it's not a violation of tisna. Right. Why? It's keeping it hidden.
Because it's overt. It's
right
out there.
The prohibition is keeping it hidden, and that's why the next part of the word of the verse, the next verse is clear. What are you supposed to do with it? Hocheach tochiach es hamisecha. Okay, don't keep it hidden. Rebuke your friend, your compatriot. Now, what does that mean? So I'm going to say it means right now. I'm going to explain why I'm going to say this. It means communicate. Okay. Okay, we're going to look at rebuke. Rebuke is a form of communication. I'm going to say it means communicate. I'll tell you why I'm going to put it as communication and not just narrowly define it as rebuke in a minute. In a few minutes, I'll explain what I'm saying. But the fact is, what it's saying is, don't hold it in, don't hide it, express it. Now, these are two emotions. If you have a person who you feel negative towards, you are not supposed to come across like lovey-dovey with him like that. You're supposed to say, listen, there's obviously we're not that. It doesn't mean that means if you don't feel any, you can sit there and say, listen, I'm not going to be buddy with him. I'm not going to go over and say I hate your guts. But the fact is that there's an idea of trying to be honest, and then there's the idea that if you really have something wrong, then you have to go and confront him, rebuke him. Now the truth is one of the things we learned from the brothers of Yosef is as Rashi says, one of the great things is that they always were obvious to Yosef that they had some problem with him. Okay, the brothers didn't, and they basically never were lovey-dovey with Yosef. They basically said, but what they didn't do is they didn't really communicate, challenge him, didn't rebuke him.
They didn't give him a chance to
defend himself.
Basically, it's like
right.
Dad loves you best, but how?
Right. So the challenge.
We work this out.
So the chance is, the fact is you're already jumping ahead to a malbim. The malbim says by chocheach tochiach amisecha that you think you're going to rebuke someone. So what he says is something very interesting. It says, because when you rebuke him, that person will show why he acted that way, and in the end, one of two things will happen. You'll either understand why he happened that way, or you'll understand what you did wrong to get him upset in the first place, and you'll apologize. That's why I'd rather use the word communicate. Rebuke seems to say, I'm right, you're wrong, I know what to do. The fact is that if you communicate, and that's why you're really jumping ahead to Yosef, it was they're angry, they should have communicated, and that would have given a chance for Yosef to respond. So that's a very important idea.
And he may have been completely oblivious. I mean, only because he was born into that kind of spoiledness and didn't know anything else.
The story of Yosef and his brothers are problematic on many levels. If you take it on a simple level, Yaakov comes across looking like a total dolt, right? It's obvious the brothers aren't getting along with Yosef, and Yaakov is going ahead giving Yosef this katonas, what is it? The katonas pasim, this coat, which is, and Rashi says this is where you learn don't play favoritism, and what Yaakov's, and then the brothers are over there throwing their hankers, and Yosef is ready to go do Yaakov's bidding. What, Yaakov, get the message. This is not healthy for Yosef. But you're
setting the guy up.
Right. The fact is that what was going on is obviously extremely, complex. It's one of those. When you always read the Chumash, there are so many cases in the Chumash where people read it literally, and they get certain viewpoints of it and so forth. And once you begin to understand that the literal story makes no sense unless these people are totally incomprehensible, just in terms of being thinking human beings, like when you like Korach. I always point this out to people in Korach, right? Anything you say about Korach, 250 people are basically told, if you show up tomorrow, the earth is going to open up and you're going to die. By Moshe Rabbeinu, they're told this. And they're so sure that they're correct, right? While they just saw Moshe go up to the mountain, was the only one to talk to God. While Moshe's walking around with the Karnei Rome. While there's a Nani Akavod all around them. Okay? Excuse me? What are they thinking? I mean, that's why Rachav's statement to Yehoshua, when the spies come, he said, "Listen, I want to promise, you're going to take me with you, right?" Well, because we all know what happened to Egypt 40 years ago. I mean, let's understand this. There's this massive group of 3 million people camped at the border with clouds of protection all around them, a traveling well with them, food from heaven, right? Clearly God doing miracles left and right because mountains are falling over and so forth and so forth. And you want to go to war against them? Excuse me, what the heck are you thinking? And Rachav basically says, I got the message. We're with you. Yeah, right. And we got the message. And not only that, we're going to stay, and those guys are afraid of you guys because we're staying behind the walls in Richo. The walls are going to protect you. Yeah. Right. The point is that you can't read the Chumash. It's like you say, well, did you really believe those miracles occur? I'm not getting into the issue if it's true or not. I'm getting the issue that don't read the story unless you understand that this is the story, right? Don't read the story about the Meraglim going off to Egypt, to Israel and having problems unless you understand that these people, were in this situation. You can't understand the story of Abraham and Lot unless you understand the midrashim that Lot knew there were angels walking around in Abraham's camp. Okay, and there are so many aspects of the story, and I've mentioned this over and over again to you. At the Chabra, I constantly go back to something we've done at Chabra, where after Eliyahu does the miracle in Har Carmel, right? I always point this out. Yaakov comes back and says, hey, he's really gone. He says, send this message to Eliyahu, you're dead within 24 hours. Excuse me, did you not get the message?
No.
And then Eliyahu says, oh boy, I'm afraid, I gotta get out of here. I mean, like, it's incomprehensible. So the fact is that you have to understand, so the story of Yosef and the brothers, on a certain level, is incomprehensible. Yaakov was acting, on the surface, total, what the heck are you doing? Right? And the point is, that's why it's so significant when you look at the story. You can't just ignore the innuendos. That's what makes the story really work. Yeah.
So, not having learned it, is there midrash or parsha that said he had Ruach HaKodesh, that he knew that Yosef was going to be the true leader? Would he not have been upset or something like that Reuven wasn't designated as his firstborn or something like that?
Well, the fact is that's why he chose Yosef over Reuven. And the fact is you get into whole issues that Yosef was the firstborn of Rachel.
Right.
And Rachel was supposed to be the and there's issues in terms of who really is the number one wife.
Right.
And therefore, and it's interesting because Reuven did something that challenged the Bechor, and that gets part of those issues there. And you get into issues like, it's very interesting because Rachel is always considered to be a Keretz Beiso of Yaakov. Yaakov was supposed to marry Rachel. And the classic concept is that really the Abbas were only supposed to have one wife. Avraham marries a second wife because Sarah says, take a second wife. Yitzchak doesn't get a second wife, and Yaakov is tricked into getting a second wife. But the fact is, there's views of positive aspects of monogamy right there. But the point is, if you look at the story of that story, there is arguments that Rachel was supposed to be. But it's interesting, like Rabbi Din Steinsaltz has a whole argument that clearly Sarah was still supposed to be the Sarah. Leah was supposed to be the prime wife of Yaakov. And he points this out by the fact that she was the one who had Rov Klal Yisrael. She's one who had, or half Chatzi Klal Yisrael. 6 Shavas came from Leah. So she's the one who's buried beside Yaakov. So really Leah is the prime wife of Yaakov. And in that argument you have a tension between romanticism and motherhood, in the sense that if Rachel's the prime wife, there's obviously a very romantic ideal to it. In Rabbi Din Steinzel, he points to the fact that Leah is the prime wife, and you see by the fact she's the one who's actually buried beside Yaakov, but it's a less romantic relationship. So, but the point is, once you go beyond the simplicity, then you start seeing the depth of the Torah. And the Torah, basically, if you read between the lines, you begin to understand that this is not supposed to be read literally. We really are very anti-fundamentalist. Okay. Anyway, so Yosef, it's clear that the issue of Yosef, but even there, the brothers showed that they were negative, but they did not do what you said, which was chocher tochiach, which would have led to communication. So chocher tochiach doesn't just mean rebuke. Chocher tochiach basically means begin the dialogue. Okay? And that's an aspect of what you do with hatred. When you have negative emotions, it's very difficult to confront the other, but the Torah basically says it. So what is Sinat Chinam? So the point is, in Sinat Chinam, it's we call free hatred. It's hatred that you allow just to stay inside. You don't act upon it.
It's your own fault because you haven't done the research to find out what it is. You're doing this and it bothers me all the time, but if I don't
but the point is why don't you do chocher tochiach? So there's 2 reasons why you don't do chocher tochiach. One is the Gemara says you only do chocher tochiach if you know how to do tochacha correctly. And we all don't know how to do tochacha. So the reason I say I'm not going to tell him, he's not going to listen to me anyways. Right? He doesn't take tochacha. Without recognizing that you don't know how to give tochacha. And what happens at that point in time? It's not just you don't know how to do tochacha. You begin to recognize your own weaknesses. There's a Gemara, I forget where, but there's a Gemara that says that basically it says a good leader has skeletons in the closet. It doesn't really say skeletons in the closet, but that type of idea. And basically what it's saying is a good leader recognizes his own weaknesses. Okay? And if you confront your own weaknesses and you understand your own weaknesses, you can be angry at your neighbor, but you also recognize your own weaknesses. And that immediately says, listen. And that comes from Hecht. Rather than saying, I can't give him tochacha because he won't listen to me anyways. In fact, they say, if they don't listen to me, I can't give tochacha anyways, there's no point. But the fact is you recognize that you can't give tochacha because you can't give tochacha. And once you recognize you have your weakness, and if Bar Kamsa would have recognized you're in this situation because there's something you might have done wrong, right? And that would be the same thing as chochacha, to yourself. So that's the first thing we do. The fact is, Sinat Chinam is basically allowing Hijra. And the second thing is an aspect of self-righteousness. The Netziv, Natalis Huda Berlin, of the last Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, he wrote this in a few places, but one place he wrote it is his introduction to Sefer Bereshis of his Eimek Davar. He says that Sinat Chinam began with the Talmidei Chachamim, who said that everyone who's not like them is not Bikaros in the Min. The fact is we have challenges because there really are people who are Bikaros in Min and Minim. But the fact is, what the Netziv is basically saying is, before you start labeling people, you should first understand that maybe you have an argument. And you should first understand the value of Elu ve'elu. And the idea that, he says that Sinat Chinam began with Talmidei Chachamim. Because when you're self-righteous, because the truth is, who are you allowed to hate? Okay, so the pasuk says Achicha, Rashi will say Achicha b'mitzvot. Okay, Achicha is someone Achicha b'mitzvot, so we're allowed to hate. So Rashi says basically someone you do something without edus, so you can't say this. But the truth is, if someone really is a true apikaris in terms of being a Rasha, right? You take a real Rasha, right? Then obviously you can have negative emotions. You can have negative emotions towards a real Rasha. Okay, because he really is a bad guy. Okay?
Not only can you should.
Right, exactly. Because a person who hates God, you should also hate. So the fact is that, but before you label someone a Rasha, you should first understand that there's a lot more positions than the positions you think are correct. And he says that was the problem. It's another problem of what happened is there was self-righteousness. And this gets back to the original statement of the Gemara. There are osik b'Torah, mitzvahs, ugmilas, chasadim. They were from. But the fact is that this is the unique challenge of being from. It's a unique challenge of basically doing things that are right. Is you start having opinions, I'm right, you're wrong. And there's a value in saying I'm right, you're wrong, because you have to know that someone is wrong. You want to make sure that that person doesn't take over and bring his negative values into the forefront. But on the other hand, you have to know that definitions of right and wrong within Torah are much broader than your narrow definitions. That's really the strength of Elu ve'elu. Elu ve'elu is basically a statement that says your position, which I find within the boundaries of Torah to be totally incorrect, I have to respect it. So where do you find Elu ve'elu? Elu ve'elu is not, well, it's really mutter to do that, so you can do that anyways. Or Elu ve'elu is that I hold it's absolutely awesome to go to university. On the other hand, you hold it's a chiv to go to university. I hold it's totally awesome to read Aristotle. You hold that it's absolutely a mitzvah to read Aristotle. That's Elu ve'elu. Okay? Elu ve'elu. Almost an answer. You hold that women should be studying Gemara. You hold that it's absolutely usher for women to study Gemara. Elu ve'elu. You take the position that you know is defendable within halacha, which you personally disagree with, and you even wonder how the halacha can even accept it, that's where you start getting to Yishuv Velu. And the reason you get to that is that's when you start getting into the dialectic, and that's where you start understanding that the truth is somewhere beyond your full comprehension. The truth is a challenge to you. And the truth is, the greatest challenge to that, that's why it's interesting when he says, with Torah, mitzvahs, and Agunos Lasadim, that the Netziv says that's where it starts. It's with people who have opinions. People who think, right? That what's the great challenge of any opinions? Is the possibility of being judgmental. And that being judgmental without communication, that's Sinat Chinam. Because what happens is you're walking around saying, I'm right. Okay? There's no point in saying anything to the other person because he won't listen to me. Okay? And therefore I'm not going to communicate. And I think it's okay for me to dislike this guy because he's not right, and so forth and so forth. And therefore what you do is you let the hate fester. And the point is that that's when you start having the roots of the breakdown of society. And the Churban Bayesheni, which lead to a gullus of so many years. What you need to recognize, if you want to recognize Sinat Chinam, is you don't say, I'm getting rid of hate. You basically say, I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to confront it. I'm going to improve on dialogue. I'm going to have discussions. I'm going to try and understand others. I'm going to try and have discussions while still maintaining your standards. And at that point in time, it's not so easy. It's a lot easier for people to say, oh, I'm going to love everyone, and so forth and so forth. Hey, yeah, that's very nice. You're going to love, free love, hippies. The point of the matter is, you go up to someone and say, listen, because I'm going to confront you on your position, I want you to confront me on that position. And understand the arguments. And understand the viewpoints. And have a little bit of, at the same point in time, that balancing or the dialectic of self-confidence in your position as well as a little bit of self-doubt in your position. Okay? Because that's what's really necessary. You have to be sure of yourself. On the other hand, you have to have a little bit of challenging of your surety. And if you have a certain balance like that, then you can have communication among people. And if you have communication, then you'll have the absence of Sinat Chinam. You might still have some negative emotions, but it won't be a negative emotion that will fester. And that's the real problem. Questions?
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You should go.
Thank you.